I'm Madeline, 28 female. I live in a city that I love, in a small but meticulously organized apartment that feels like the only space that's truly mine. By day, I'm an architectural drafter, spending my hours translating visions into precise, tangible plans. It's a quiet life, one I've built for myself piece by piece. For my entire life, I believed I was part of a prestigious, loving family. But I was about to find out that the blueprint they had for my life was something more sinister than I could have ever imagined. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Chapter 1, The Setup, A Picture-Perfect Life. If you were to look at a photograph of my family, you would see the perfect image of success and unity. My father, Dr. Arthur Graham, is a renowned cardiac surgeon, a man whose hands are spoken of with a reverence usually reserved for artists. My mother, Catherine, is a curator at a prestigious art gallery, a woman who moves through the world with an effortless grace and an eye for beauty that she applies to everything, from the paintings she hangs to the placemats on her dining table. And then there is my older sister, Sophia. Sophia is a corporate lawyer at the city's top firm, sharp and ambitious, the embodiment of our parents' aspirations. In every photo, she stands slightly ahead, my father's hand on her shoulder, my mother beaming at her. And I'm there too, Madeline, the quiet one, the architectural drafter. I'm usually standing slightly to the side, smiling, always making sure the composition of the photo is just right. For 28 years, I believed my role was simply to be the supportive, less dazzling daughter. I thought that was a normal family dynamic. I had no idea that my position was not just secondary, but conditional. Growing up, the difference in how my parents treated Sophia and me was a subtle, constant hum in the background of my life. It wasn't overt cruelty, it was a matter of temperature. Sophia was the sun, and I was the shade. Her achievements were trumpeted at every family gathering, every holiday dinner. When she won her first debate tournament in high school, my father bought a new trophy case. When she got into a top-tier law school, my parents threw a party that was catered by a chef I'd only read about in magazines. Her life was a series of grand, public celebrations. My successes, in contrast, were met with a gentle, almost dismissive pat on the head. When I won a citywide award for a design project in college, my father smiled and said, "That's nice, dear. Did you hear Sophia just made law review?" My passion for architecture, for creating spaces and structures, was treated like a quaint hobby. "It's good to have a creative outlet," my mother would say, her tone suggesting it was something a person did on weekends, not as a serious career. They paid for my education, of course. They were not neglectful in the material sense. They provided everything a child could need, but not what I truly wanted, their genuine interest, their unqualified pride. I convinced myself it didn't matter. I loved my work. The clean lines of a blueprint, the logic of a structural support, the satisfaction of seeing a drawing become a physical reality, that was my validation. I poured myself into my career at a mid-sized firm, earning the respect of my colleagues and my boss. I had my apartment, my friends, and a life that was stable and my own. My best friend, Ben, was my anchor. We'd known each other since college, and he was the one person who saw my work not as a hobby, but as a discipline. A software engineer himself, he understood the beauty of building something from nothing, of logic and creativity intertwined. Your parents don't get it because they can't hang a blueprint in a gallery or brag about it at a dinner party, he told me once. Their loss, Maddie, you're building the world. He was the family I chose, and his belief in me often felt more real than the polite applause from my actual family. The tension, however, always resurfaced during family events, and one was approaching, my father's 60th birthday. This wasn't just a birthday, it was an event. My mother and Sophia had been planning it for 6 months. The venue was a grand ballroom at a historic hotel. The guest list was a who's who of the city's medical and legal elite. My role, as usual, was logistical. I was tasked with coordinating with the hotel staff, managing the seating chart, and designing the invitation cards. I didn't mind the work, my drafting skills made organizing complex arrangements feel natural. I created a beautiful, elegant card with a minimalist design that I was genuinely proud of. When I showed the proof to my mother, she glanced at it for a moment before saying, "It's very simple, Madeline. I was hoping for something." With a bit more flourish. "Sophia found a wonderful calligrapher. We'll use them instead, but thank you for trying." She said it so casually, without a hint of malice, which somehow made it worse. It wasn't a rejection, it was an afterthought. My contribution was erased without a second thought. I swallowed the familiar sting of disappointment and nodded. I told myself it was for my dad. I loved him, and I wanted his birthday to be perfect, even if my part in it was invisible. A week before the party, I was at my parents' house, a sprawling, beautifully decorated place that always felt more like a museum than a home. I was there to drop off the final guest list and confirm a few last-minute details with my mother. Sophia was there too, having just returned from a business trip. She was regaling our parents with stories of her successful negotiations, her voice bright and confident. I sat on the plush sofa, listening, feeling the familiar sense of being an audience member in my own family's story. My mother hung on Sophia's every word, while my father refilled her glass of wine, his face beaming with pride. "That's my girl," he said, clapping her on the back, "taking the world by storm." Sophia smiled, a perfect practice smile. "I learned from the best," she said, raising her glass to him. It was a scene I had witnessed 1,000 times, in 1,000 different variations. The golden child and her adoring parents. And me, the quiet observer, the backup. Chapter 2, The Betrayal, the words that broke everything. The air in my parents' home was always perfectly climate-controlled, but that evening, it felt heavy and suffocating. After an hour of listening to Sophia's tales of legal triumphs, I made my excuses to leave. I had an early morning meeting the next day and a long drive back to my apartment. I gave my father a hug, received a brief, airy kiss on the cheek from my mother, and waved to Sophia, who was already scrolling through emails on her phone, her attention having moved on. "Drive safe, dear," my mother called after me as I walked toward the grand foyer. I had just stepped out the front door and pulled it closed when my phone buzzed. It was a text from my boss with a query about the project for tomorrow's meeting. Annoyed at myself for not checking before I left and not wanting to deal with it on the road, I decided to step back inside to sit for a moment and type a proper reply. The front door was heavy and silent. I opened it just a crack and slipped back in without a sound, assuming they thought I was already gone. I leaned against the wall in the dimly lit foyer, my thumbs moving quickly across the screen. From the living room, I could hear their voices, muffled at first. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the house was so quiet that their words traveled clearly down the polished hallway. They had moved on from Sophia's job and were now discussing the party. Specifically, they were talking about the cost. "The catering bill is astronomical, Arthur," my mother said, her voice laced with a familiar theatrical sigh. "But for your 60th, we have to do it properly. It's a reflection of us, of our family." "I know, Catherine, I know," my father's deep voice rumbled in response. "It's a one-time expense. Besides, almost everything is settled. The house is paid off, the investments are solid, and Sophia's trust fund is in excellent shape for her future. She'll never have to worry about a thing." My ears perked up at the mention of a trust fund. I knew Sophia had one. It had been mentioned in passing over the years. I had always assumed I had one too, though it was never discussed. I figured it was just one of those things wealthy families did, a quiet safety net for the future. Then Sophia spoke, her voice clear and crisp. "Well, it's a good thing I'm so successful. I won't need to touch that for a long, long time. It's for my kids, really." There was a moment of comfortable silence. I finished my text, my finger hovering over the send button. I should have left right then. I should have slipped back out the door and driven away, remaining in my state of blissful ignorance. But I hesitated. And in that moment of hesitation, the conversation took a turn that would shatter my entire world. It was my mother who spoke next. Her voice was lower, more conspiratorial. "Still, it's good we have a backup plan, just in case." A backup plan? I frowned, my curiosity piqued. What could she possibly mean? I pictured investment portfolios, emergency funds. My father chuckled. It was a dry, humorless sound. You mean Madeline? My blood ran cold. My name, spoken in that context, felt like a shard of ice in my chest. What did I have to do with their finances or a backup plan? Sophia laughed. It wasn't her bright, public laugh. It was a sharp, knowing sound that cut right through me. Ah, yes, good old Madeline, the emergency fund. I felt my breath catch in my throat. I couldn't move. My phone felt like a weight in my hand. I was frozen to the spot, hidden in the shadows of the foyer, as my family, the three people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, dissected my life's purpose. It's not a joke, Sophia, my father said, his tone suddenly serious. It was a practical decision. When you were born, you were so fragile. The doctors weren't sure. We were terrified. His voice softened with a memory I was not a part of. So, we had Madeline. We needed to ensure the family line, the legacy, would continue. It sounds crude, I know, but we had to be prepared. She was our insurance policy, our backup. The words hit me not like a wave, but like individual, precisely aimed stones. Insurance policy. Backup. I wasn't a second daughter. I was a contingency plan. My existence was a response to a potential failure in their first attempt. The past 28 years of my life suddenly replayed in my mind, but this time, the film was tinted with a horrifying, clarifying light. Every dismissive comment, every overlooked achievement, every time I felt like an afterthought, it wasn't just favoritism. It was my designated function. My mother added her own justification, her voice smooth and reasonable, as if she were explaining a choice of fabric. And it's worked out perfectly. Sophia is strong and successful, everything we hoped for, and Madeline, well, she's responsible. She has that stable little job. We put the second house in her name for tax purposes years ago. She's never even asked about it. She's a good, simple girl. She'll be fine. If Sophia ever needed anything, truly needed anything, Madeline's assets could be liquidated. She would do it for her sister. She's always been so compliant. Her assets could be liquidated. A house. There was a second house in my name that I knew nothing about. My signature, my identity, had been used as a financial tool, a safety net woven for someone else. I was not a daughter. I was a resource. I was a rainy day fund in human form. My compliant nature wasn't a personality trait they valued, it was a feature they exploited. I felt a wave of nausea so powerful I had to press my hand against my mouth. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick with their betrayal. I didn't hear what they said next. A roaring sound filled my ears, blocking out everything but the echo of those final words: backup, compliant, liquidated. I finally pressed send on the text, the action feeling robotic and detached from my body. Then, as silently as I had entered, I turned, pulled the heavy door open, and slipped out into the cold night air. I didn't run. I walked, each step feeling heavy and deliberate, away from the house that was never truly a home, and away from the people who were never truly my family. The picture-perfect lie had been torn to shreds, and all that was left was the ugly, devastating truth. Chapter 3, The Discovery, the Truth and the Details. The drive back to my apartment was a blur. I remember the streetlights streaking past, the hum of the engine, the feeling of my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles were white. But I wasn't really there. I was still in that hallway, the ghost of their words clinging to me like a shroud. Backup daughter. Insurance policy. Her assets could be liquidated. By the time I stumbled into my apartment, I was trembling, a deep, bone-rattling chill seeping into my marrow that had nothing to do with the night air. I locked the door, leaned against it, and slid to the floor, the raw, unprocessed reality of what I had heard crashing down on me. For years, I had constructed a narrative to make sense of my life. I was the quiet one, the artistic one. Sophia was the star, and I was okay with that. I had found my own path. I had told myself this story so many times that I had come to believe it. Now, I saw it for what it was, a beautiful, intricate lie I had co-authored with my family. They provided the ink of deceit, and I supplied the paper of denial. Every memory I had was now tainted, every interaction reframed by this new, horrific context. The birthday parties where my gifts were smaller and less thought out than Sophia's. The family vacations where my preferences were never consulted. The way my father's eyes would glaze over when I tried to explain the complexities of a structural design, only to light up moments later when Sophia mentioned a case she was working on. It wasn't just parental preference. It was a calculated, long-term strategy of asset management. I wasn't a person to them. I was a portfolio. I couldn't stay there on the floor. I got up, my movements stiff and robotic, and walked through my small apartment. It was the one place I felt safe, the one space I had curated myself. Every object, from the worn armchair in the corner to the row of architecture books on my shelf, was chosen by me. It was my sanctuary. But now, even that felt violated. The phrase, her assets could be liquidated, echoed in my mind. What? Assets, my meager savings, my car, and then I remembered. We put the second house in her name for tax purposes years ago. A house. A whole house that was legally mine, a property I had no knowledge of, used by them as a hidden reserve for their golden child. The betrayal was so profound, so deeply rooted, that it felt like it had hollowed me out from the inside. My first instinct was to call them. To scream, to rage, to demand an explanation. But what would they say? They would deny it. They would gaslight me, call me hysterical, tell me I'd misunderstood. They would turn it around and make me the villain for eavesdropping. My mother's calm, dismissive voice, my father's disappointed sigh, Sophia's sharp, mocking laugh, I could already hear it. Confronting them without proof, without a plan, would be pointless. It would be playing their game by their rules, and I would lose just as I always had. No, I couldn't fall apart. Not yet. The part of me that was an architect, the part that relied on logic, precision, and solid foundations, began to stir through the fog of pain. An emotional outburst was a crumbling structure. I needed a blueprint. The first person I called was Ben. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and groggy. "Maddie, it's past midnight. Everything okay?" I tried to speak, but all that came out was a choked sob. "Whoa, Maddie, what is it? What happened?" he asked, his voice instantly alert and concerned. I managed to get the words out, a torrent of broken sentences about the conversation, the trust fund, the house, the backup daughter. I expected him to be shocked, but Ben had always been skeptical of my family's perfect facade. He listened patiently, letting me pour out the entire ugly story. He didn't interrupt. He just let me speak until I was exhausted, until the sobs subsided into shuddering breaths. "Okay," he said finally, his voice calm and steady, a rock in my churning sea of emotion. "Okay, Maddie, first breathe. Second, they are monsters. I've always thought they were polished sociopaths, but this is a new level." His blunt validation was more comforting than any platitude could have been. He wasn't telling me I was overreacting. He was confirming my reality. "Third," he continued, "what my mother said is true. Her assets could be liquidated. That means you have assets. That means you have power you didn't know about. We just need to find out what it is." He was right. My pain was morphing into something else, something cold and hard and sharp. Anger. Not the hot, flashing anger that leads to screaming matches, but a cold, focused fury. They had underestimated me my entire life. They saw me as simple, compliant, and uncurious. They had used my trust and my love for them as a tool for their financial scheming. They had made the biggest mistake of their lives. They had assumed I would never find out, and they had no idea what I was capable of. For 28 years, I had been the family's quiet, background support structure. Now I was going to become the architect of their downfall. The discovery was the first step. The truth was in the details, and I was about to examine every single one. The next morning, I wouldn't be going to my meeting. I would be going to the bank, the county record's office, and anywhere else I needed to go to uncover the full extent of their deception. My compliant days were over. Chapter 4, The Investigation, a digital paper trail. The morning after the world ended, I woke up feeling strangely calm. The storm of grief and shock had passed, leaving behind a cold, clear sense of purpose. I called my boss and told him I had a family emergency, a lie that felt bitter and ironic on my tongue. The first thing I did was sit down at my computer with a fresh notepad and a pen, the tools of my trade. If I was going to understand the full scope of my family's betrayal, I needed to approach it like a project. I needed to gather data, analyze the evidence, and draw up a plan. My target was singular: find the house and any other financial entanglements they had woven around me without my knowledge. My first stop was my own bank account. I logged in online and began to comb through years of statements, looking for anything unusual. It was tedious, but my work had trained me for this kind of meticulous detail. For hours, I saw nothing but my own salary deposits, my rent payments, my grocery bills. It was the mundane record of a simple life. But then, I found it. Going back about 5 years, I noticed a series of small, regular monthly payments, around $200 each, being made to a property management company I'd never heard of. The payments were labeled simply property tax escrow. I had always assumed it was something to do with my own apartment's rental agreement, some fee buried in the fine print that I'd overlooked. My parents had helped me set up this bank account when I went to college, and looking back, I realized they had probably set up this automatic payment then, counting on me never to question it. It was a small enough amount to fly under the radar. But $200 a month for 5 years? That was $12,000 of my money. My money, paying for a property I didn't even know I owned. The name of the property management company was my first real lead. Next, I turned to the internet. A search for the company led me to a local firm that managed rental properties in a wealthy suburban town about an hour away, the same town where many of my father's colleagues lived. On their website, they had a portal for property owners. Out of a desperate, long-shot hope, I tried to log in using my email and the standard passwords I used for things. Nothing. Then I thought about my parents. What password would they have set for me? I tried my birthday. Nothing. I tried my dog's name. Nothing. Then a cold, sickening thought entered my mind. I typed in Sophia 1. The page loaded. I was in. They hadn't even been creative. In their minds, I was so insignificant that my security was an extension of my sister's identity. My heart pounded as I navigated the dashboard. And there it was, listed under my name. A 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom house at 142 Willow Creek Lane. The page showed the current tenants, the monthly rent they paid, a staggering $4,000, and the account where the rent was deposited. It was not my bank account. It was a holding company I didn't recognize. The property taxes were being partially paid by my escrow account, but the profits, the real money, were being funneled somewhere else entirely. I felt a surge of rage so intense it made me dizzy. For years, my parents had been collecting nearly $50,000 a year in rental income from a property that was legally mine, all while I was carefully budgeting my modest salary, thinking I was just another young professional trying to make ends meet. They weren't just using my name for tax purposes, they were running a business through me. This was bigger than I had imagined. I needed help. I called Ben, my voice tight with a mixture of fury and vindication. "I found it, Ben. I found the house. It's real." I explained everything: the escrow payments, the property management portal, the password, the rental income. He was silent for a moment, and then he let out a low whistle. "Maddie, this is not just immoral. This is criminal. This is tax fraud and identity theft. They used your social security number to open that account and declare that property without your consent." He was right. This wasn't just a family drama anymore. This was a legal case. "We need more," Ben said, his voice shifting into the logical, problem-solving mode I knew so well. "We need to follow the money. That holding company, what's its name?" I gave him the name, and Ben went to work. As a software engineer, he had a knack for navigating the labyrinthine depths of the internet, for finding information that was meant to be hidden. While he dug into the holding company, I tackled the next piece of the puzzle: the county records office. I took the rest of the day off and drove to the county seat. Public property records were just that, public. It took me less than an hour with a helpful clerk to pull up the deed for 142 Willow Creek Lane. The clerk's eyes widened slightly as she handed me the file. "Quite a property," she commented. I just nodded, my stomach churning. I opened the folder, and there it was in black and white: a warranty deed, transferring the property to me, Madeline Graham, and at the bottom, my signature. Except it wasn't my signature. It was a forgery, a close imitation, but different enough that I could see the subtle variations in the loops and strokes. It was dated 8 years ago, when I was 20 years old. They had forged my signature on a legal document when I was barely out of my teens, binding me to a massive financial asset without my knowledge. I made copies of everything: the deed, the property tax records, every document in the file. As I walked out of the records office, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Ben. Got it. The holding company, Graham Legacy LLC, was established by your father 8 years ago. The sole beneficiaries listed on the account where the rent is deposited are Arthur Graham, Catherine Graham, and a trust. Guess whose name is on the trust? I didn't have to guess. Sophia's, I texted back. Bingo, he replied. They've been laundering the rental income through the LLC and then depositing it tax-free into a trust for your sister. Maddie, you're not just the owner of the house. You're the unwitting front for their entire illegal operation. I sat in my car in the parking lot, the stack of documents on the passenger seat beside me. The digital paper trail was complete. I had the bank statements, the login to the property portal, the forged deed, and the details of their shell company. This was the solid evidence I needed. Is was the foundation. They had thought I was simple. They had believed I was compliant. But they had forgotten that I am an architect. I know how to read a blueprint, and I had just uncovered the blueprint of their entire deceitful world. Now, it was time to draw up a new one. A plan not for a house, but for justice. Chapter 5, The Plan, the architect of my own revenge. For the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life. To my family, I was the same old Madeline. I answered their calls with polite, brief responses. I confirmed my RSVP to my father's birthday party. I played the part of the compliant daughter so perfectly that they suspected nothing. They would ask how my little projects at work were going, and I would give them vague, non-committal answers, all the while knowing that the biggest project of my life was unfolding in secret. My apartment, once a sanctuary of peace, had transformed into a war room. The wall above my drafting table was no longer covered in sketches of buildings, but in a web of sticky notes, printed documents, and timelines that mapped out my family's deception and my impending response. Ben was my co-conspirator, my partner in this clandestine operation. We spent our evenings huddled over my laptop, fueled by coffee and a shared sense of righteous indignation. With the evidence I had gathered and his technical prowess, we pieced together the full picture. The house at Willow Creek Lane was just the centerpiece. We discovered that my name had been used to co-sign on 2 of Sophia's luxury car leases over the years, boosting her credit application. My excellent credit score, which I had worked so hard to build, had been used as a scaffold for her lifestyle. We also found a brokerage account I never knew I had, with minimal activity, likely opened with my information just to have another financial vehicle at their disposal. Each discovery was another brick in the wall of their betrayal. But I refused to be just a victim. I was an architect, and it was time to design my countermove. My plan had to be as meticulous and unassailable as one of my blueprints. It couldn't be just an emotional outburst. It had to be a systematic dismantling of the structure they had built on my unwilling back. The plan had 3 phases. Phase 1, reclamation. This was about quietly and legally taking back what was mine. I couldn't just sell the house from under them. The forged deed complicated things. So, my first step was to consult a lawyer. Not one of my father's or Sophia's cronies, but a sharp, independent lawyer Ben knew through his network who specialized in property fraud. I'll call her Ms. Davis. I laid out the entire story for her, presenting my folder of evidence. She listened intently, her expression growing more severe with each document I showed her. Ms. Graham, she said when I had finished, this is one of the most egregious cases of familial financial abuse I have ever seen. The forgery on the deed is your primary weapon. We can have the original transfer declared fraudulent. But, she added, a strategic glint in her eye, there might be a more powerful way to play this. Her advice was brilliant. Instead of immediately challenging the deed, I should first take control of the asset. As the legal owner on record, I had every right to do so. So, under Ms. Davis's guidance, I took the first concrete step. I drafted a formal, legally binding letter to the property management company. It informed them that as the sole owner of 142 Willow Creek Lane, I was terminating our current agreement. I was invoking a clause in the contract that allowed the owner to end the service with 30 days' notice. I also instructed them that all future rental payments, starting immediately, were to be redirected to a new bank account that I had opened. An account that only I controlled. I sent the letter via certified mail, so I had proof of receipt. The first brick was being removed from their foundation. Phase 2, isolation. This part of the plan was about cutting myself off from their web. I went to my bank, and with the help of a manager who was horrified by my story, I closed the account my parents had helped me open. I moved my money to a new bank, one they had no connection to. I went through the arduous process of changing every automatic payment, every direct deposit. I also contacted the credit bureaus. I placed a fraud alert and a freeze on my credit, explaining that I had been a victim of identity theft. This would prevent any new accounts or loans from being opened in my name without my express, verified permission. It was a firewall. I was isolating my financial identity from them, ensuring they could never use me as a tool again. Each step felt like I was taking a piece of myself back. Phase A3, the confrontation. This was the final, most daunting phase. This wasn't just about money or property. It was about forcing them to face the truth, to see me not as a backup plan, but as a son they had profoundly wronged. A simple screaming match wouldn't do. I needed a stage. And they had already built it for me, my father's 60th birthday party. The grand event they had been planning for months, a public celebration of their perfect family and their esteemed status. It was the perfect venue to tear down the facade in front of the very people they sought to impress. My role was not to make a scene in the traditional sense. I wasn't going to stand up and give a drunken, tearful speech. My revenge would be as quiet, precise, and devastating as the stroke of a pen on a blueprint. I spent hours preparing a package for each of them. For my father, I compiled a neat folder containing a copy of the forged deed, a printout of the Graham Legacy LLC's formation documents with his name as founder, and a summary of the potential legal penalties for tax fraud and forgery. For my mother, a copy of the property management portal login page showing her daughter's name being used as a password, along with a highlighted bank statement showing my money paying her taxes. For Sophia, a copy of the trust document showing her as the sole beneficiary of my stolen income, alongside copies of the car leases she'd used my credit to secure. Each package was a mirror, reflecting their specific role in the scheme. The final piece of the plan was a letter. I wrote it and rewrote it a dozen times until every word was perfect. It was calm, factual, and utterly final. It detailed what I knew, what I had done to reclaim my assets, and what my terms were for not pursuing legal action. This letter would be my closing statement. I would not attend the party to watch the fallout. My revenge would be delivered, and then I would be gone, leaving them to sit in the rubble of the perfect life they had built. The architect of my own revenge had finished her design. All that was left was the execution. Chapter 6, the confrontation, tearing down the facade. The day of my father's 60th birthday party arrived with a cold, gray sky that perfectly mirrored my mood. It was not a day of celebration for me, but a day of reckoning. I spent the morning in a state of calm, focused detachment. I went to my yoga class. I had a long lunch with Ben, who gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. "You've got this, Maddie," he said. "You're not just tearing something down, you're clearing the site for your own construction." His words resonated deeply. This wasn't just about destruction. It was about creating the space for my own life to begin. My family had been calling and texting all morning, a frantic flurry of messages asking where I was and when I was coming to the hotel to help with the final touches. I ignored them all. My only role in their party today was one I had assigned myself. Around 4 p.m., 2 hours before the guests were scheduled to arrive, I drove to the Grand Hotel. I wasn't dressed in the formal attire they expected, but in simple, dark trousers, and a blouse. I looked like a staff member, not a guest, which was perfect for my purposes. I walked past the ballroom, where florists were putting the final touches on extravagant centerpieces, and went straight to the front desk. "I have a delivery for the Graham party," I said to the concierge, my voice even and steady. "For Arthur, Catherine, and Sophia Graham. They are in the presidential suite getting ready. It's very important they receive these immediately." I handed him the 3 pristine, sealed manila envelopes. On each one, a name was written in my neat architectural script. The concierge, seeing my professional demeanor, nodded and dispatched a bellhop without question. I watched until the bellhop disappeared into the elevator, then I turned and walked out of the hotel without a backward glance. The first part of the confrontation was complete. The fuse was lit. I went to a quiet cafe across the street, found a table by the window with a clear view of the hotel entrance, and ordered a coffee. Now, all I had to do was wait. I imagined the scene in the suite. The 3 of them in various stages of getting dressed, surrounded by champagne and anticipation. The knock on the door, the bellhop handing them the envelopes. The initial confusion, perhaps annoyance at the interruption. Then, the sound of paper tearing. The silence as their eyes scanned the documents. The dawning horror as they realized what they were holding. The forged deed, the LLC documents, the bank statements, the trust fund details, the calm, devastating letter that accompanied it all. In my letter, I had been brutally clear. I laid out every fact, every piece of evidence I had uncovered. I informed them that I had already taken control of the house, redirected the rent, and frozen my credit. I explained that these envelopes were my no. No, I would not be their backup plan. No, I would not be their compliant, silent asset. And no, I would not be attending their party. The final paragraph was my ultimatum. I wrote that I had a second set of these documents in the hands of my lawyer. If they tried to contact me, harass me, or challenge my control of the property in any way, she was instructed to forward the entire file to the IRS and the district attorney's office. The choice was theirs: public humiliation and criminal charges, or silence and acceptance of their loss. I had given them a single, non-negotiable term for my silence. They were to leave me utterly and completely alone. About 45 minutes after I had made the delivery, my phone started to explode. First, it was my mother. A string of frantic texts. "Madeline, where are you? We need to talk about this. You've misunderstood everything." Then the phone calls began. My mother, my father, Sophia. I watched the screen light up with their names, my heart pounding a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I silenced the phone and put it face down on the table. The silence was my answer. Their panic was my confirmation. Through the window, I watched as elegantly dressed guests began to arrive at the hotel, oblivious to the drama unfolding upstairs. They were walking into a party where the hosts were imploding. I could only imagine the frantic, whispered arguments happening in that suite, the blame being thrown back and forth. My mother's curated composure shattering, my father's surgical precision turning into raw fury, Sophia's sharp legal mind scrambling to find a loophole where there was none. They were trapped. Forcing themselves to go downstairs, to smile, to shake hands, to pretend everything was perfect, must have been torture. They had to stand there for hours, surrounded by their friends and colleagues, the very people whose approval they craved, all while knowing their carefully constructed world had been fractured by the one person they never saw coming. The real confrontation wasn't a shouting match. It was their forced silence. It was the knowledge that I, the backup daughter, now held all the power. I had not only taken back what was mine, but I had also seized control of their narrative. They couldn't spin this. They couldn't dismiss it. They had to swallow the truth and smile through the ashes. After another hour, I saw what I had been waiting for. My father's black town car pulled up to the front of the hotel, not at the main entrance, but at a side door. A minute later, Sophia emerged, her face pale and tight with rage, her beautiful evening gown looking like a costume for a tragedy. She got into the car and it sped away. She had fled her own father's milestone party. The united front was broken. I finished my coffee, left a generous tip, and walked away from the hotel. I didn't feel triumphant or joyful. I felt a profound, quiet sense of release. The facade had been torn down. The sight was finally clear. Chapter 7, The Aftermath, A Life by My Own Design. In the weeks following the party, the silence from my family was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, but it was also exactly what I had demanded. They didn't call, they didn't text, they didn't email. They adhered to the terms of my ultimatum because they had no other choice. They knew I had them cornered. The fear of the IRS and a public scandal was a more powerful motivator than any love they ever pretended to have for me. It was a bitter pill to swallow, realizing that our relationship could be terminated as cleanly as a business contract, but it was also liberating. For the first time in my life, I was not waiting for their approval or bracing for their disappointment. I was simply free. The first order of business was to deal with the house. With Ms. Davis's help, I made the decision to sell it. I had no attachment to the property. To me, it was a symbol of their deceit, and I wanted it out of my life. Because the deed was technically in my name, I was able to list it. The process was clean and swift. The house was in a desirable neighborhood and sold within a month for a price that was, to me, astronomical. After paying the capital gains taxes, the lawyer's fees, and putting aside a significant amount to clear up any potential tax liabilities my parents had created in my name, I was left with a sum of money that changed my life. It wasn't just a windfall, it was restitution. It was the physical manifestation of my reclaimed identity. The money gave me options I never dreamed of. My job at the architectural firm was stable, but I had always harbored a desire to start my own small design studio, focusing on sustainable and accessible housing projects, the kind of meaningful work my parents would have scoffed at. With the proceeds from the house, that dream was no longer a distant fantasy. It was a viable business plan. I spent the next 6 months doing just that. I rented a small office space, hired a junior drafter, and began networking, building a client base from the ground up. I named my studio Blueprint Design, a nod to my past and a declaration of M. Why future? I was finally creating my own structures on my own terms. Ben was by my side through it all. Our late-night sessions of evidence gathering had forged our friendship into something deeper. He was my first client, hiring me to redesign the layout of his apartment. We celebrated the sale of the house with a bottle of champagne on the floor of my empty new office, and in that quiet, happy moment, something shifted between us. Our relationship evolved naturally from friendship into a loving, supportive partnership built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine admiration. A foundation that was solid, real, and honestly built. I did hear whispers about my family through the grapevine. A mutual acquaintance mentioned that my father seemed subdued and had stepped back from some of his hospital committee duties. Another person told Ben that Sophia had left her high-powered law firm and taken a less prestigious in-house counsel job at a smaller company. The Graham family was no longer the shining beacon of success they had once been. Their perfect facade had cracks that only they could see, but the strain of maintaining it was clearly taking its toll. My mother, I heard, had stopped hosting her lavish parties. The silence I had imposed upon them had become their prison. They were left with each other, trapped in the truth of what they had done, with no audience to perform for. About a year after the party, a single letter arrived at my office. It was from my mother. Her handwriting, usually a flawless, elegant script, was shaky. I almost threw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. It wasn't an apology, not really. It was a rambling, self-pitying letter about how their lives had been upended, how I had been cruel, how I had torn the family apart. It was full of justifications and blame. But at the very end, there was one sentence that stood out. "I don't understand why you did this. We always gave you everything." I read that sentence over and over, and in it, I saw the chasm between their reality and mine. They thought everything was money, a roof over my head, a place at their perfectly set dinner table. They could never comprehend that what I had wanted was love, respect, a sense of belonging, things that were not on their balance sheet. They had given me things, but they had taken my identity. They had provided for their backup, but they had never truly seen their daughter. I folded the letter, put it in a drawer, and never looked at it again. It was the last piece of the old structure that needed to be filed away. My life was my own design now. It wasn't as grand or opulent as the one they had envisioned for my sister, but it was strong, it was honest, and it was built on a foundation of truth. And from where I stood, the view was beautiful.